Hello and welcome to another Madaxeman podcast. This is a list building special for ADLG, and we're picking an unusual topic this time. It's spearmen, or more precisely, hoplite spearmen, the kind of big round shield guys who you get in those early books, kind of the pre-successor era, the era of the classical hoplite, Greece, Sparta, all of that sort of shove and push or whatever, fighting off the Persians and doing all that kind of thing. They're an unloved troop type. They're possibly an underestimated troop type. And I've got Dave and also Richard with me here, looking at what lists you can put together, how you can make them work, giving ourselves the constraint of having to use 12 hoplites in any of the lists that we do. So there's 6, in fact there's actually 7 lists in this podcast to go through. There's a bit of tactical advice, there's a bit of talking about figures, and so sit back, enjoy the Hoplite podcast.
This means war. This means war.
Well, welcome to another special one-off list-specific, although this is a slightly unusual list-specific podcast. I'm joined by Dave and Richard, who you may remember from the patchy audio quality Seleucid podcast and the much better audio quality Indian podcast over the last few weeks. And what we've decided to do or picked to do or pulled out of the bucket of army list to do this time is to look at probably an underloved troop type, which is heavy spearmen, or more specifically kind of classical era hoplite heavy spearmen. These were the mainstay of classical era armies for a long time. The Greeks are almost the baseline for all of those Hellenistic and successor armies, and the clashes between the Persians and the Greeks and the Athenians and the Spartans are iconic. But I think that those sorts of troops do give a lot of war games rules a challenge, because the armies are potentially pretty vanilla. They're spearmen, and I think in ancient rules where you get a big long period of history and lots of different troop types, your textbook armored or unarmored man with spear and shield is almost your baseline troop, and sometimes they do, as a result, end up, if a rules writer makes them too good, it kind of can unbalance all the interesting stuff that moves around and is a bit more colourful, possibly. Maybe that's the idea. So I think certainly in ADLG, the heavy spear is a good building block, but it's sometimes overlooked for more interesting and more fun things. It's that Seleucid list piece. And I guess what we're trying to do this week is look at some of those classical armies and see if there is a way or how you would go about using something. And we've all given ourselves the kind of artificial test of, can we build some lists with at least a dozen spearmen? Because once a dozen, you're getting up to a lot of your combat frontage, you're getting up to half the army, so you are actually building a proper spear list, not a list with a couple of spears doing something else. It's got to go big on the spears. But going back to that kind of earlier point about the challenge of making this sort of building block troop interesting and making some of those spear on spear clashes interesting for what was sort of such a pivotal part of military history, or such a famous part of military history. It's kind of always been a challenge, hasn't it, with previous rule sets and previous things to make that more intriguing.
I think that's true if you go for rules that cover the whole ancient period. There are a couple of fun, narrower rule sets. One is called Get Sparta, which is all about hoplite on hoplite clashes, and really brings in the difference of different quality and different depths of formation. And then the other one I could think of, which is a little bit outside the period, but is more for Saxon shield walls, is the old Dark Age infantry slog system, where a lot of the game was about how do you use your leadership points in terms of steadying the line, encouraging them to charge, and those kind of things. Because if essentially your battle is going to resolve down to two long lines of spearmen pushing at each other, you need to get the interest from something other than a combat factor and a dice roll.
Yes, yeah. And I think that bit about rallying troops and using leadership is something that you need to work quite hard to utilize that, particularly in ADLG. But I guess where you've got a lot of spear units, you've got the opportunity to choose where that leadership goes. Whereas in, I think, some of the systems that we played before, where once you get into a unit based game, you're only playing with I guess 3 or 4 units, and they lock into combat, and that's kind of done. But it's where that element based game does make it slightly more interesting. I can think back to sort of DBM days when using armies like the Russ, which was just a wall of spears across the table, the pushback mechanism did in itself create some sort of ebb and flow, and the anticipation of breakthroughs and weaker units and weak points but you couldn't really do a lot to reinforce them in those rules. There was no rallying. Whereas here, we've got hit points and the opportunity to rally them off. So there is still a bit more kind of dynamism, even if it's not necessarily represented on the table. But I don't know, are these armies that you've had a go at using with something that kind of majors on spears before, or has this been a theory, ADLG theory list writing exercise?
Probably more of the latter, but I have faced, in putting together my lists, I have drawn on experience of armies I've faced that have caused me sort of headaches, or at least caused me thought. And I think we'll get into it in the detail, but one of the interesting things is the good value of mediocre spearmen. And spearmen as a whole are, the challenge with them is that they are great constituents of the army, but they don't quickly kill anything. They're a grind the enemy down troop type. And so particularly if you're in a competition with, quite short game lengths, under 2.5 hours, you can be winning with the spearmen, but not quite crush the enemy in time. And so I think that's what puts off some people in choosing it in a competition. But I mean, how can you not love an army that could have the 300 Spartans in it? It's certainly a colourful period historically.
It's the one you want. Dave, is it something that you've played or played against, or has this been really kind of a theory exercise for you as well?
I think with any set of war games rules, having played FOG to competition level in ADLG, that you tend to find the spear are kind of like the baseline figure, and then you've got the toys and the pluses on top. So it's the spearmen suffer from that in the classical period because you've got so many pike, Romans, impact swordsmen, impetuous swordsmen, which kind of negates I think Richard's got a very good point in there. Cheap value, especially as you say, the mediocre ones makes it. I mean, the list we've come up with made that really interesting. I think to really in the Dark Ages period, you get a lot more spear because they're more a constituent part of the armies, and you've got that bow spear combination thing coming into that as well, and facing off against knights and things. But where you've got infantry lines hitting each other and you've got Romans being impact and elite, then the spear are always going to suffer. I mean, they're a troop type I'm afraid I tend to avoid.
Yep.
Even, and I know a lot of people will be sitting here going, what about my Spartans? Because the Spartans do something.
The Spartans do it differently, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this last night, thinking there's, it's possibly complicating things incredibly, but there's an argument in way that have defensive spearmen and impact spearmen somewhere along the line. So your Spartan can be as good as a pikeman in
first impact.
Yeah, exactly, and that might give it a bit more ebb and flow. I think there was a set of rules called Hoplite, wasn't there, once? I never played it, but I think that was to give a lot of the more feel of the shield walls fighting, and there's a word in Greek which I've forgotten, something osiosis, which is about the actual ebb and flow, because two spear walls hitting each other, it's like a rugby match.
It's
when the
pushing.
groups hit each other, they'd actually lift off the ground in the front ranks.
Right.
And the hopple on the shield was actually bowed so that you could breathe behind it as the people behind you shoved you forward with their spear. There's a lot of interesting things in there. And also, the spear wall would naturally move to the right to protect itself. So there's a few things in there which could.
Yeah. I mean, one of the I think few distinctive things about fog that in some ways I miss is that distinction between offensive and defensive spear. In that, there were armies where the spear was the main force of attack. Spartans, Hoplites, generally Saxons, but in many other armies, the spear are basically adopting a defensive role around which the mounted nobles can rally or hide or have a breather in between the fighting. And ADLG is sort of abrogated to a sort of higher level and doesn't really cover that. And again, equally, it doesn't really distinguish between the drill and command and control ability of, say, Spartans compared to, minor city-state militia who don't do as much training or drill. But I think you accept that in exchange for being able to get the game over in a reasonable amount of time, because the more chrome and period detail you put in, with so many troop types, it becomes an over-heavy game.
Yeah, I guess, if you look at spear as a unit, you've got something there that it's heavy infantry, so it's not quite as vulnerable to mounted as mediums by definition. It's got 4 hits, which to me is kind of almost bizarrely sort of one of the most important characteristics about it. If it starts to go down, it's still going to take a long time to die. It's got the ability to cancel the impact of mounted. So those sort of strike mounted, or in fact any mounted, doesn't really want to charge into it. So it's a real, it's a toxic piece of terrain for anything mounted. But a lot of those characteristics come to their fore in the later period, really, when you get more mounted floating around. It's a strange one that toxicity to mounted, the kind of the X factor for which makes spears more than just vanilla lump with 4 hits, really only plays in where the opponent's got a lot of mounted, which isn't really the case in this textbook classical hoplite period anyway. There's not a lot of mounted floating around there, and I guess until maybe some of the successor armies come in with a bit more stuff.
Although I think one of the reasons heavy infantry evolved was to block heavy chariots.
True. Yeah, actually think about that.
Because if you look at, the Assyrians are developing it first, but through that sort of evolution in the 7th, 6th, and 5th century BC, that's because prior to that, nearly everything is medium.
True, actually, yeah. Or it's even the heavy troops, the swords are classed as swordsmen, which are a lot more vulnerable to chariots. So actually, yeah, you're right. The rise of the hoplite is at the same time as the ending of the heavy chariot era. So it's maybe an interim step to go from heavy chariots dominating the battlefield to a more combined arms, phalanx, pike, elephant, Zeistophora cavalry, all that sort of thing. So it's an intermediate
just as
step.
then the response to it was either to supercharge it with a pike phalanx or to disrupt it with a Roman peeler.
Yes.
So every weapon system reaches its apogee, and then someone works out a way to defeat it, just as we're seeing in modern times the end of the tank.
Yeah, as we have been for the last 30, 50 years, of course. So maybe that is then why the spear is what it is, because it was a bridge between the end of the chariot era. It neutralized that one thing, but then a whole range of different things came up to replace it. And then by the time it had come back into vogue, it was still there as much as part of a much more combined arms operation with knights and other types of troops. The later armies are much more that, whereas the early ones are in a lot of ways heavy chariots and a support for getting the heavy chariots in. So they are that pivot point, because they are the pivot point in history, as a way in the way these things develop.
The city-state, citizen militia, and I think one of the interesting things, I would say even the Achaemenid armies is, I'm almost classify it as a biblical army, where they would just show up en masse and you gave in to the great king.
Right.
Whereas the Greeks in their city-state with their citizen heavy infantry were going, no, we'll actually have a fight.
Right.
We'll actually take you on. And people go, what? You're actually going to have a fight?
Yeah. Actually, that's an interesting point. I was listening to, I wouldn't even hesitate, I wouldn't even pretend that we're anywhere even in the same, planet as this, but I was listening to an episode of In Our Time, the Melvin Bragg thing yesterday. I think we've talked about it on the podcast as well. And yeah, the importance of the cultural piece around it, about, some things like citizen infantry and that willingness to fight. You have got a troop type that marks the point at which culturally people were prepared to stand up and fight rather than be impressed by their lord and shuffled onto the battlefield and given a bow and
it's an obligation to fight for your city.
Yeah.
Changes.
Well, it's when you move from being a subject to a citizen.
Yeah.
And that has a lot of power in it.
Yeah, that clearly does. Okay. Well, look, that's kind of chewed that over for a while. Let's move on and look at the lists.
This means war. This means war.
Okay, well, look, we've got 6 lists to look at. We're throwing up 2 each here. So starting with this one, this is one of mine, which I think there's quite a number, once you start digging into that classical period, there's quite a number of hoplite lists around there, and some of them are kind of cool and kind of interesting with a few more toys, and even giving ourselves the shackles of making sure there's 12 spearmen still means you can get some interesting toys. But what I've done here is put something up that is kind of a list without the toys, really. This is, I've used these sorts of lists a few times, particularly in competitions down the club. Used Syracusans, I have used classical Greeks as well. And I think just to talk you guys through this one, and then let's have a chat about it. This is Theban classical Greek list number 60. So what you've got here is a big army, which I think is very important with spearmen. You need to be getting width and getting fighting width in the army. And this one has got a 10, an 8 and a 10. I've used the strategist because I think going first with hoplites is quite important. So to bump the initiative up, it's a bit expensive. It's a bit overkill for what they're going to be doing, but you're really using it for that extra initiative point. Same reason almost for putting in those 2 Theban light cavalry to give you a chance of having more control over terrain and going first. So, but this is a pretty simple build structure. So your first command has got 6 hoplites. One is the Theban Sacred Bandits Elite. The other are 5 hoplites, ordinary heavy spearmen. You've got a light infantry javelinman, possibly a bit light. There aren't that many of them to screen it. And then you've got a medium cavalry and 2 light horse, which are unlikely to do much. Maybe you've got an open flank to do a little bit, but the medium cavalry is probably going to be a reserve. The second command, I've gone 3 normal hoplites, 2 mediocre hoplites, 1 elite hoplite, included general, sits in there, a couple of light infantry bow to screen it. So that's just 6 wide of hoplites. You're up to 12 of hoplites so far in width. And then the final one, you've got 2 mediocre, 2 ordinary, 1 elite hoplite to take you up to 17, and a couple of Thracians, 2-handed cutting weapon, couple of light infantry bow and a javelinman. And this is really the command, competent general, included and unreliable, bit of a Richard point saver there. This is really the command that there's going to be a flank with some terrain on. So So it's 5 hoplites in the open, it's 2 Thracians and a javelinman in the terrain to slow it. And the aim of the game is saying, this army has 17 fighting troops who've all got 4 hits. And the aim of the game is to get all of them into contact pretty solidly. The elite spearmen are as good as anything. That probably does make up for not having the impact or being pikemen or something in a long way. It'd be good if they could be armored, even so, but you can't in this period with the strategist. But what you're trying to do is get 17 combats going and hope that your opponent only has a proper combat frontage of about a dozen, and then after that they start getting into second-rate troops who shouldn't be in the front line. And it is saying you are going to lose somewhere, but the enemy's got to kill an awful lot of hit points to break the army. So that's my kind of textbook first way of looking at it. Any thoughts?
So I think it's a very strong list for all the reasons you've set out. I think it's vulnerabilities, because I've done a Theban list as well, and so grappling with the same issues. And I think one of the big questions is, do you go for the included generals or not? Because my feeling with the spearmen is that command and control is very important, because you're often going to win by eventually hitting somebody in the flank. And the frustrating thing is, because the spear are not super strong, it's very easy for the general to get locked into combat for a long period of time and then not have the movement points to actually exploit the flanks that you're creating. So that really, for me, is potentially the only issue. Other than that, I think you've got so much fighting power and so much resilience with so many 4 cohesion point troops. I think it's going to be a very hard army for someone to defeat. I just wonder whether you will always have time to exploit its strengths, would be my only comment.
I think one of the things I find is that I think Richard's right about the generals being included, but then I think we're doing an imaginary competition where you've got to have 12 hoplites. Everybody's going to have very large armies. So, whereas when we did the Seleucid discussion, we were talking about armies of 22, 23. Here we're talking about 28 or more. So the width is going to be important to try and create the flanks and things like that. One thing I've done with my list is I've tended to drop a javelinman behind each hoplite phalanx, if that makes sense. Because if there is a gap, if a hoplite dies and the enemy hoplite goes through the gap, you can pin that hoplite with a javelinman, thus stopping him turning on the flank of your other parts of your line. And if he has to charge you away, but you then have the ability to evade. So you're preventing him. You're always going to prevent him getting through your line and things. So I think there's a few tricks to fighting with these hoplite armies, and I think that's what I really like.
Yeah, I think on both of those things, I think it's such. Yes, I think having generals who can float around and do rallying and do that control is a win. But once you've got an elite heavy spearman surrounded by spearmen either side of it, that is such a damn tough thing to kill. And in an army that doesn't often get those +1s, everything here is fighting at base factor 1 in a lot of ways.
Yes.
To have that extra +1 in 2 of these nearly unkillable hoplite things is kind of compelling. I think there's a very, very valid thing to say, disinclude both of those generals, that's 6 more points, lose a mediocre spearman, you've still got an awful lot of troops here, you've still got 27. I think that's very, very valid. I think it probably comes down to how do you want to play it.
Yes,
style.
absolutely.
This is a this is rolling the dice to the left of the table rather than rolling the dice to the right. It's which way do you roll the dice, and it is a bit of a toss up, isn't it? If it is an army about grinding the enemy down, grinding them down does take time, and being able to win somewhere quickly, I think you can argue it either way. I think if we sit here as three people and chew it over, you go, yeah, I should have been sensible, but maybe this might get me a better story in the pub afterwards. It might not get me as much use of the engravers on the trophy, but if it would have a damn, this is the Jimmy White way of playing a boring army rather than the Steve Davis way.
I think it's also very much in line with the ethos of the period, which is the general fought in the front rank with his troops. And I think, as we've discussed in other of these sessions, a lot comes down to knowing your style as a player. So it's really just a point to consider. If you're someone who likes to have your generals fighting in the front line, then you might as well include them. If you're someone who prefers to be more of a stand back and direct things, then, as you say, drop one hoplite, pull the generals out. Both will work. What suits your playing style best?
Yeah, and I think, to be fair as well, the first iteration of this army, I'd got the list slightly wrong, and I'd managed to armour up the elite hoplites as well, and which isn't allowed in the date with the strategist. So if they become armoured, suddenly that becomes even harder to kill, becomes an extra bonus, and possibly tips it even that way. So I think there's probably an element that this is a bit of a halfway list as well.
I think there's another thing we should think about, is that the light foot screen in front of the hoplites, especially if they're unarmoured, becomes very important. If an enemy has got shooting, albeit javelinmen or something like that, if you can damage a few of the hoplites in the way in, that makes the actual fight much more different. And there's another thing with that is, if you can force your enemy to attack you, in response, you've got that chance to do the rallies and things like that, bring your light foot up on the edge to create overlaps. And the further thought is, you've actually got to sit here and say, right, my general can only move 6 wide frontage forward, but I want to be everywhere as wide as, if not wider than, my opponent. So you don't want to be 6. You want to have the potential to be 7 or 8. Because if each command lines up on each other, it's the overlaps which are going to make the difference. And
that's
again,
interesting.
That's very historical.
Yeah, because I guess with this one, that medium cavalry and the javelinmen could give you a bit of an overlap in the first one. The second command there is the one that sits in the middle and just goes forwards, and the last one, you're looking to extend into that terrain with the Thracians and the javelinmen peltast as well. So you're potentially getting up to 8 with that one, which is getting a bit more interesting. Okay, then, well, let's look at the next one. Well, look, that was the first classical Greek army, and a little bit of picking apart of it, some of it self-inflicted. So, Richard, this is your also a Theban list, actually. You've also bottled the Spartans. Maybe that's something we can come back to and talk about later anyway. But you've gone for a Theban list, but you're here, you're 27, so almost the same as my 28. What's your theory on this one?
So it's a lot of similarities with yours, in that I've got a central command that is just spearmen. Because I did want to include the general, again, with the elite spearmen, I thought that I would shrink the width of that particular command and only have 4 in it. And I've taken a bit more light infantry than in yours, and it's partly because, as you said, when the spearmen are not armoured, they are a bit vulnerable to enemy light infantry coming up and having a pop. So I wanted to do that. So that's that central one. I've left it unreliable because actually partly what I'm trying to do is advance the two wings and hold back the centre. So if it becomes unreliable, it isn't the end of my plan.
Yeah.
And having a strategist, I hopefully would have the pips to, pass over in order to try and make it become reliable. So going to the first command, 5 hoplites. Now with the javelinman, as Dave mentioned, either he can go into the rough or he can pop out around the side to provide an overlap. The idea with the medium cavalry, in part, is that as the two wings advance, if anybody's attacking the central command, the two medium cavalry, one from each flank, can turn in on the flanks of that. That's if you've got, if you like, a closed flank. If you've got an open flank, then they would be out wide in the more traditional cavalry role. And obviously one medium cavalry can't do much, but it just means that if the enemy is threatening to turn your flank with something, the medium cavalry is threatening to charge the flank of whatever's attempting to flank the hoplite line.
Yeah, and even just by blocking or slowing down that happening for a couple of turns, you're buying 2 more turns to grind people down with your 4 hit hoplites, aren't you?
Exactly. And so the idea of having a light javelin horse with that is it just gives it a bit more reach. It just gives you a little bit of missile capability. So I've got one on each wing. And then looking across to the other side, it's a bit similar, but again, as with yours, I've got the Thracians in there as well. So that was the one that can handle more rough terrain. I've gone brilliant and strategist because I actually think there's quite a lot to do. You've got to command a spear line. You've got these medium and mounted troops. So in each case, I always want a minimum of three movement points each turn.
Yeah, having 2 medium cavalry and splitting your light cavalry as well. Yeah, you've got 3 movement groups in that last command, haven't you?
Yeah, and the same potentially in the first one. And if you are moving the light infantry separately, it's even 4, which is why I've spent the points on command.
Yeah.
And the other advantage of that is I've now got 4 initiative, as you say.
Which is huge, isn't it?
Desire
really
to
big.
Want to control the battlefield. Taking the strategist means you get 2 shots at removing a really bad piece of terrain that you really don't like. And what it suffers from compared to yours is I haven't got anything like as many hoplites.
Yeah, you're I think 13 against my 17. And in terms of other combat troops, there's 1 extra horseman, really.
And I think 1 extra javelinman who's a kind of...
Yeah, 1 extra javelinman as well, actually, yeah.
So it would depend a lot on, where the terrain was. As we said, it comes down to style. This gives me the opportunity to do a bit more dancing and manoeuvring for position, which is the kind of game I like to play.
Yeah, but it's always a tricky one when ultimately your game still does depend on getting 13 spearmen into contact, isn't it? Because you've gone for none of the mediocre ones as well. So maybe the difference in mine is 4 extra mediocre ones, but you get a bit more stuff to play with. Dave, this has got your javelinman as a possible reserve in a couple of those things. It's got a bit more of a skirmish screen. What's your take on this one? I think this is really
strong because you're going to win the initiative 9 times out of 10 or 6 times out of 1.
Yeah.
That centre command, which is the smaller with the unreliable general, is going to go down first. You're going to get a very, very good look at where your opponent's army is. And you're going to be able to line up your matchups, work on the flanks, and get there. I see Richard's, going to be hunting the camp with light cavalry or medium cavalry to get round. I think it's a really strong one, and you've got a few more light foots. You've got the Cretans in there to drive off the other person's light foots, screen, and have the fights. There's something. If you bring up your hoplites straight behind your light foot screen, and if your light foot don't get that shot in, you might force a fight with his light foot, and then bring up a hoplite as an overlap to kill that. There's lots of little tricks in these games. This is a lot more, with the theme of having 12 hoplites, it's a very, very subtle competition. I could see us doing this competition quite easily,
Yeah, it could be quite an interesting classical matchup, couldn't it?
Yeah, and at this risk of repeating myself, having that javelin man behind the line to just protect you from breakthroughs is a really strong thing. But I think the difference here is in my list, I've not gone for the command at all. I've just gone for sheer oomph and strike and said, I don't care about the initiative, but I can see this one would give me a lot of problems in the manoeuvre.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, look, let's look at your list next, Dave.
This means war. This means war.
So, Dave, your first list here is early Macedonian, which is I guess moving towards not being a hoplite army, but it's still got hoplites in it, which is all great. We've got this on screen up here. You've, by the looks of it, managed to eke out somewhere 29 units, which is a new record, given that we started with 27 and 28. That's pretty good. But initiative of just 2. It's a 500 AD one, and your first command with an ordinary included general is kind of not a hoplite army command at all. But look, take us through these commands. Tell us what's in each one and what it's going to do.
Well, I'm hoping, I'm 29 large, so I'm sacrificing the initiative. Well, although I've got initiative of 2, you never know. So I'm thinking I'm going to be defending. Being on the defensive means I'll be able to choose more terrain, which is one of the things that's going to be a benefit I'll come on to in a minute. And so the early Macedonian list it's north of, obviously Macedonia is north of it, so you're talking about an area which has got more cavalry. So the first command I've got is my standard sort of companion command. I'd like to have all 4 of the companions, but I'm only managing to get 3 in the points. But that command is just, so there's 3 companions and 2 light horse. That command's job is just to go round the flank. I'm hoping I can come forward, pin the enemy with the other 2 commands, and leave the cavalry to try and exploit a flank, get round to the back with that command.
Because 3 of those heavy cavalry impacts, it's a pretty powerful force, isn't it? With a couple of light cavalry javelin that can drive off anyone with the Scythians and things like that.
You can have a go at spear up front, and if you don't get burst through, you bounce off and have a regroup and have another go. But that command is about manoeuvre, taking the camp, manoeuvring around the outside, and just causing problems. Which means that an opponent's going to have to sort of swivel and turn. I think that if someone tries to counteract that cavalry command, they're going to use 5 units, possibly spearmen, to try and counteract it.
That's drawn a lot off. So your second command has got a rather ludicrous, I'm not sure I've ever seen this before, 16 units and a competent general. So let's all sit back, stuff some stuff in the pipe and put the slippers on, and you can explain to us how you command 16 units with a competent commander. What does this one do?
Well, I think the real point that this army has a compulsory 6 javelin men, the Macedonian peasants. You can upgrade 4 of them to ordinary, but some of them are mediocre. What I'm trying to do with this command, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but I've given it a competent commander because I'm figuring that he's going to be going with the javelin man, and I want to use that manoeuvre of the javelin. I think in this period, hoplites eventually got taken down by peltasts, by manoeuvring troops in terrain. I want to put a lot of terrain down, and I want to try and get those javelin men going. So if an opponent has got some medium foot, he's going to be facing what essentially is 6 medium foot. And
all the lists we've looked at so far, that the medium foot is I've got 2 Thracians and that should be okay. And
Yeah.
I can see that 6 javelin men is, even if some are mediocre, is a bit of a problem.
Okay, I might lose 2 of my mediocre javelinmen to the Thracians, but then I will always get round the side of the Thracians and pop them with my other guys. So the centre command is going to be the Spartans. They're going to go forward.
This is your third command, the Spartan ally.
So I've got 3 Spartan elite, 2 other spearmen. That's, and I've got a pretty strong light foot command with that. And I've also got the javelinmen in that command to give them width or cover any breakthroughs. That's going to be the troop which comes forward, pins the enemy while the cavalry manoeuvre. And what I thought was the idea of this army is this is an army of manoeuvre. Although I possibly don't have the command points, there's some argument there to lose a few of some of the we've got to have 12 hoplites. I think if I was allowed to have less, I'd be having less in the second command and I'd be using it for command points.
Yeah. Okay, that's an interesting way of doing it. And it's, as you said, there's a historical precedent for it in that all of these, we're assuming this is in this hypothetical hoplite themed competition. A lot of people are not going to want much terrain and they're not going to have much to put in it. But if you've got an army that lives in the mountains, comes from the mountains, and can operate in the mountains with 6, even if some of them are rubbish, javelin men, that's sort of a historical thing, isn't it? That's got a Macedonian feel about it.
What actually did for the heavily armoured or the heavy infantry hoplites in time in Greece and before the Macedonian phalanx appeared was if the Croatian hoplites, who were medium infantry, more medium infantry, faster moving hoplites with a long spear, but the ability to throw javelins, move away and operate in terrain. I'm hoping to, and also, as I say, I'm going to almost choose to defend, put terrain down and use those terrain troops.
And this is a list I think it's just one of the, it's kind of like one of the square states list. You kind of fly over it, don't you, and never look down. But I don't know, Richard, you're looking at this with a quizzical expression, unless it's just the Zoom screen not being quite high enough resolution. But are you as intrigued by this as I am?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting ideas here. I think having the Spartan in the centre, you've got the ordinary included general. You've got, with 3 elites, you've got quite a bit of punch there. I think the potential as you say, if your opponent hasn't got much infantry, mediocre medium foot padding out the line is really, really strong. I think the issue might be if the companions really swing wide, do they leave the one flank of the Spartans hanging in thin air against somebody who's got a couple of extra things that can slip past them? But at 29, there are not going to be many people who are able to do that. But the javelin men, even with 6 of them, if they don't have a huge piece of terrain, and that's where, against a couple of the armies we've just looked at with a strategist, if they're able to push the terrain out of the way and those peltasts don't have a suitable piece of terrain to hang in, and with that command only having having a competent general, there could be a time when if it begins to unzip, you don't have the command points to move things. But I think it's going to give anybody facing it is going to be thinking, 29, how am I going to take this down? And it's going to be, it's going to be deploying on pretty much across the entire table.
I think there's one of the things with ADLG, because the games are shorter and the armies are smaller, you can actually use or sensibly put out to a one-day competition these kind of one-shot theory armies, can't you?
Yes.
If you're taking it for one competition, you're pulling together 6 javelin men, you're putting it on the table for 3 lots of 2 hours. it's not like it was when you could have spent months painting it up and it's your whole weekend and you're getting crushed 4 times in 3.5 hours slowly. You can do a bit, put something a bit mad and roll the dice, and I think this for a thin competition.
My army mad.
Well, I think mad's the wrong word, but it's a crap or bust kind of approach. You've got, here's a trick. It's a historical trick. It's an interesting trick. It's an unusual trick. It's a list no one's going to have looked at, but you've still got a dozen hoplites, because that's the restriction we're giving ourselves, plus 3 companions. So you are 15 wide of something pretty solid, which is half the width of the table, which is a lot for a lot of armies as well. And the companions can kind of come and go, can't they? If they don't like what they're facing, they can just fall back, and nobody's going to catch them.
I think the javelinmen in these hoplite armies are possibly the really interesting troop, because they can shoot, they can evade, they can slip fast past the end of lines very quickly. I think there's an argument here that the Spartans tie themselves against a hard piece of terrain, possibly a coast, Thermopylae style, and then you put these Macedonian hoplites in the centre, and then you take the javelinmen with the companions to overwhelm one flank.
This means war. This means war.
So Dave, should we flip on to your next one then, which is starting to be a bit more different. We've moved down from 17 to, I think, 14 to 12 hoplites. So your next one here, which is a Chironian Greek. So I'm trying to remember what the few lines of text about this army say it actually is. The Chironians.
It's North Africa, kind of. The Chironians was a Greek city-state on the North African coast. So they learnt some things there from the Libyans, the Carthaginians, of which I've got an ally in there. So it borders on Egypt, that sort of thing. It's a sort of, I think it was a Spartan colony actually, and it was a sort of, it's got a little bit of more funkiness to it, shall we say?
And it's a very half-hearted, paltry 27 units strong, but you have managed to get 0 initiative out of it. So look, you've got an 8, a 10, and a 9. So it's not quite as bizarrely unbalanced as the rest. But talk us through what's in these 3 commands, starting with your competent general in command 1 and his chariots. Okay,
so the North African armies, the old Carthaginians are heavy on the chariots. So chariots are like an equivalent of a knight. Chariots can take on heavy infantry. It helps if they've got impact. I'm thinking that you're gonna come against enemies who've got chariots, whether it be early Carthaginian or this army. And I've got 5 chariots, and I'm thinking that they're all going to go together to some extent. If the 3 heavy chariots get into a fight, I've got 2 heavy chariot impact manoeuvring on the outside. I want to use, I think this army base is again, you want a piece of hard furniture, hard terrain, a coast maybe to put command 2, which has got 8 hoplites, possibly keeping some of the hoplites back.
Actually, sorry, just looking at it. So your first command, even though it's an 8, it's kind of a bit like that textbook. What's the command? Assyrian command. That's 2 or 3 chariots, a cavalryman to pad it out, a couple of light foot to screen it, and then you just bunged a javelinman in there. But that's really a 3 chariot delivery and support weapon, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that the javelinmen are going to operate in assistance to core 2, if possible, if I've got the pips to do.
Okay. So then your second core is 8 hoplites, 5 ordinary, 3 mediocre, and a couple of screening Libyan light foot. So that's sat in the middle, isn't it?
Yeah, and I've saved a few points making their arrival. That's the first command to go down. That's the blocker just rolls forward. That's there to sort of absorb the enemy's impact, whilst the game is won by the Carthaginians and the command 1 of heavy chariots. I'd probably put the Carthaginians in the centre, because they're an ally, and then their spearmen can combine with the core two of, so then you've got all the spearmen together, and you've got that really powerful sacred band, heavy spearman armour elite.
Okay.
Who's I've painted up a very nice figure for. I'll never leave that behind.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's that's the link between the chariots and the Carthaginian and the battle line. So that's the pivot line. That's what you want to go through with.
So that's an interesting sort of side question. Where there is one. A lot of these lists have one elite or one armoured spearman, one really good spearman amongst the line. Do you see that as something that goes in the middle of some other spearmen as the cutting edge, or is it, as you said, the thing on the end of the line that stops it being turned?
I think it's the end of the line. I think what I'd probably do is put one of the African spearmen, then the sacred band, then two African spearmen, then all the Cyrenian spearmen together. But that sacred band you need it to have one on the outside, but you're hoping that's going to punch through and turn the line.
As a punch through, is it not better in the middle of some other stuff, or is it? Can it get taken out of the game if it's on the end of a line?
I've had it where you sit there and think, well, this is the best troops on the table, most expensive, and you throw a 1 and the enemy throws a 6 and it's pear-shaped. So I think the way I would use it is go one African spearman, then the sacred band, then another 2 spearmen.
Okay.
Whereas if I'm using that kind of structure, I have it on the end next to the chariots.
Yes.
So
Literally
that you increase the chance of the chariots breaking through.
I see. So whilst it's on the end of the spear line, it's actually fighting with the chariots. So it's actually part of it's giving you
Correct.
3 in this one. You've got 2 elite heavy chariot impact, and you're trying to get the sacred band fighting with them to give you a 3 wide frontage of just deal with this, you bugger. Yeah.
Exactly. So that, because what you really want in an army like this is you want the chariots to break through quickly so they can take out a second unit.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I've got the javelin men with the chariot commands, because I want to, if the chariots go through, I want the speed of the javelin men to use, I think I would probably keep in the Carthaginian ally, keep the javelin men alongside the chariots to give it width and move at the same speed. But it's interchangeable.
So this is moving more towards the anvil and hammer style. You've still got a big press there with a dozen hoplites, and one of them's armored elite. But the hoplites here are absolutely an anvil to neutralize part of the army, and then you're actually playing with quite a lot of chariots here, which is more almost a Middle Ages style of using spearmen and knights in some ways.
I think there's an argument again. I don't have enough command and control, but I'm figuring on this is going to be a lot. These games are going to be large armies, and you've got to sacrifice one or the other.
No, it's interesting. Winding that back to that, the very first list, that almost probably the most textbook Theban list that I put up with 17 spearmen. It's still, some of which are mediocre. So here you've got a dozen spearmen, and then five heavy chariots, 2 of which have got impact. So you're actually still at 17, but you're taking the gamble of putting chariots into spearmen, which is kind of an interesting thing. So it still matches up.
That horseman at 5 points is to give width to the chariots again and go and take the camp if I can manage it.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting
This
stuff.
means war. This means war.
So then, Richard, we're 4 lists down, 2 more to go, and we're kind of moving slightly. Or Dave's one had moved into almost a medieval style last time, hammer and anvil. So you've gone Syracuse. There's another strategist here, Agathocles, possibly. That's not going to be how it's pronounced, is it? Agathocles, I don't know. That's definitely not how it's going to be. I assume he was someone famous if you're from Syracuse. And you've got another 4 initiative, which is remarkable for a hoplite army as well. But talk us through your 29. Is this actually the highest so far? You're 10, 8, and 11. Run us through those command by command then.
So start in the middle, which would be the Syracusan. They're all mediocre. You put them down first, and they're there to be a target to attract people. So if you do go unreliable, you hope to get activated by someone desiring to get at you. A bit like the other Theban army, then two well-commanded flanks. The idea is to throw those forward with then the opportunity to hit anybody going after the Syracusans with a medium horseman. So on one open wing, you've got 6 good hoplites supported by some light foot and some horse. But the real sort of surprise, perhaps, in a competition of a lot of hoplites is a command with 5 impetuous swordsmen.
Yeah, that's that really is a potential dice roll, isn't it? Really, you can put them in terrain, or you can just have a punt.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. If you end up on a very open table, but it's also got 2 heavy cavalry, so they're there. You know, if you were facing off against the companions, for example, we heard about earlier, or the chariots on their own, I think the medium swordsman might be in trouble. But with 2 heavy cavalry and some light horse riding wide of them, where the opponents mounted have got to look to their flank, they aren't going to be quite so gung-ho about getting stuck in. And if those 5 impetuous swordsmen hit 6 javelin men, I think they've got a good chance. Equally, if they hit 6 hoplites, I think they've got a good chance.
Hitting 6 javelin men, just picking that out of the air as a theoretical possibility.
As a theoretical possibility.
Theoretical possibility entirely. Yeah.
Not that anyone would put them in an army list.
Not that anyone would put them in an army list at all, on a flank in terrain at all. When did you put this list together? During this podcast?
It was yesterday, yeah.
Oh, it was yesterday. Okay, all right. Were you've got a strategist in there commanding the medium swordsman, the impetuous medium swordsman, and the heavy cavalry. Were you not tempted to maybe put a couple of the hoplites from the middle in there as well, given he's got all that command and control?
Yeah, except that you say it's a lot of command and control, but if you're holding the impetuous swordsman at some point, that's 3 points right there. So you always want to be able to hold them and move the heavy cavalry, because they're only heavy cavalry. They're quite good in period when a lot of the other cavalry is medium. But, I tried to make them elite. I just couldn't find the points because they can be upgraded to elite. I decided...
With your 29-unit army with a strategist.
Yeah, because a lot of it's quite weak. So you really want those horsemen to be free. I mean, the whole idea is to have a 17 frontage of hoplites and warband. And then on top of that, you've got cavalry on either flank.
Yeah,
so,
that's enough to actually do something, isn't it, with those?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, interesting, because I don't know, I'd almost be half tempted to pull a couple of the hoplites into that command, because I think, first of all, you said holding the medium swordsman impetuous, which doesn't really figure in my battle plan very often, really. But if it happens, it happens. But I always find having a couple of spearmen supporting cavalry can just make a huge difference. It makes those 2 cavalry really wide, and the spearmen can sort of sucker in chariots or impact horse or something like that and lose slowly. But it really acts as a force multiplier, because it frees up your other heavy cavalry. But
it's a good point.
Yeah, Dave, what about you? What's your thoughts on it? Obviously, you're facing it with horror if you're looking at with your Macedonian hat on.
Well, I'm not convinced by that, but no, the early Carthaginian army that I often use and won competitions with, funnily enough, warfare. I use something similar to this army, although it doesn't have the chariots, the Carthaginian. But when you're in period, if you've got that big group of medium swordsmen impetuous, that is really powerful, and it's quite a surprise to somebody if they come rushing down you. I think one thing I possibly do is possibly put a javelinman into that command if I can afford it by dropping some points somewhere else. Just having something which moves at the same speed as the impetuous medium foot, but is a little bit more controllable to expose those flanks and make use of it.
I suppose you could always swap one of the impetuous sword for, I'm assuming that there's a javelinman in there because there usually is somewhere.
There is, and I did think about that, but I just thought, if I'm coming up against 6 hoplites, I really want to have
5.
Five of them. And it's where the discipline of having to have the 12 hoplites is good, because if you didn't have that, you'd probably naturally nibble away at the number in order to have more toys. One of these, one of those, and you'd soon be having 8 hoplites. And I think that's where a special themed tournament like this is proposed to be, really forces you to do different things, and perhaps puts on the table an army that might look actually more historical.
Yeah,
no, that's another good way of doing it. All right, well, we'll come back in a minute.
Agree with that. I think we're coming up with some really weird combinations. Shows you sit in the same light. This is a competition with 12 compulsory hoplites, but then we're looking at some incredibly different armies.
Yeah, but they're all kind of viable, in period.
Yeah.
This means war.
Well, look, that was I think the fifth of our 6 lists, but this 6th one is actually one of mine for the 12 Hoplites podcast. As you can see, it's actually on the ADLG wiki on Madaxeman already. So this was like a few of the other ones that we've gone through towards the back end of the list, was starting to try and get a bit more interesting and use the hoplites as the core, but I think it also possibly uses more mediocre hoplites as or the many of the other ones. So just to kind of run you two through it, starting off, the key thing with the Sciatic Egyptian army, it's quite an interesting list. It's one of those ones that repays looking at a few times, and in one of the periods you get effectively 4 heavy chariot impact elite Assyrians who somehow get washed up in Egypt some way. So that's such a potent force. It's really about trying to use those. So what I've done, I've split the chariots between 2 commands. The first one, 2 chariots, and included competent general, obviously with the chariots to give them much more punch. Little bit of screening light foot, an Egyptian javelin 2 Nubian bowmen, a light horse as a bit of an outrider, Assyrian medium cavalry as a bit of an outrider as well. So you've got 2 chariots plus Assyrian medium cavalry and a light horse with javelin to extend that. And then I stick in 2 of the men-fat mediocre hoplites that the inner line of battle against proper infantry opponents are, they're not a speed bump because they take a while to die, but they're not great troops. But you stick them out on a flank against mounted, and you cover them with 2 light foot bows so they don't get hit by archery or bow fire, and they can really support the chariots and make some enemy mounted bounce off. So after that, second command, kind of the bigger one, again, another competent general. This is where the other 2 heavy chariots are. They could work on a different flank, or they could work with the other 2 to give you a block of 4. Again, a light horse javelin to accompany them if they go off roaming on their own. And then you've got a solid block, or a solid-ish block, of 4 of the mediocre hoplites, but 2 elite hoplites, which are, I think, as we've talked before in this, kind of almost as good as anything else in period. You have to have a couple of crap bowmen, Dave. I'm sure you'll be happy about that. They come in pairs. Yeah. I can reuse some of my Egyptians with the stripy hats, which is always a win as well. A couple of light foot bow and a light foot javelin to screen the hoplites, but you're still getting a 8 wide combat thing there, of which, okay, 4 of them are mediocre, but 4 of them are elite, and a couple of bowmen supporting it as well. And then the end piece is a sort of another just pure hoplite thing, and you get 4 proper armored Greek kind of pseudo mercenary hoplites in this, and And again, all of these lists are worked on the basis that we're playing in period, in a theme, a fairly tight historical theme. And that's where armoured hoplites really come into their own. And I think there's probably an argument that they might even be better than elite unarmoured in some ways, just through that extra resilience and the fact they don't need anybody screening them to protect them from shooting. And then these guys obviously have an ordinary included general, which makes them even tougher to get into combat. So 2 of your units are going in with generals. You've got 2 elite hoplites, 4 armoured, 4 chariots, and then you've got a whole set of other mediocre, half a dozen mediocre hoplites to extend the line, but kind of distract a bit and hopefully soak up some of the enemy's better troops while you beat up on their weaker troops with your 6 really good hoplites and 4 elite chariots. So that's a bit like that kind of Carthaginian thing as well, using the chariots and using the hoplites as a bit more of an anvil. So that was my other theory. And of course, to say, it does allow me to use some of my Egyptians as well as some of my Greeks in the same army and get double bubble from that set of troops.
You get your
the Siced on Egyptian Marines are some of my favourite, with the big tower shields and stripy skirts. So getting those out, it almost tempts me to buy some more of them. But looking at this compared to some of the other ones, what are the thoughts of you guys on seeing this on table?
I think it's extremely strong. I think particularly in the period where you're going to be facing 12 plus hoplites from the opponents, as you say, some that are slightly more vulnerable but will take a while to die. The others have all got a slight edge, and that slight edge should be enough to help the chariots. You've got 4 of them. You just have to get lucky. At initial contact against a normal hoplite, you're going to be 1-2 down, but you just have to get lucky that one time out of 4, and the odds would favour that to actually begin to blow a hole in the opponent's line, and then the opponent's in real trouble. In a slightly more open period, you've possibly not got enough light foot to screen the mediocre hoplites and the chariots from shooting. But in the period, there's so little shooting other than light foot that I think there's plenty to do the job. And I think you've got a lot of flexibility here. Again, you've got 2 included generals. So that first command, if the general is in and gets stuck in, then that could be issues. But a lot of the other lists had that too. So
yeah, and I think in that first one, once the general's stuck in, that command isn't doing a lot. You're kind of hoping those 2 mediocre hoplites are already engaged with some enemy mounted by then, and are either beating it just through being spearmen, or are taking a while to go down to give your chariots a bit more time to fight for the win.
Yeah,
I think you're going to be hearing the armoured hoplites and the guard hoplites, or booing the mediocre ones.
Yeah.
It's the one or the other.
Yeah.
You're going to be sitting there going, why didn't my armoured guys go straight through the line and the elites? I mean, I'd be tempted to put the elites and the armoured guys together and give it maximum oomph at the point of contact.
You can't. But
you can't put them in one command, but you could deploy them together for sure. Yeah, for sure.
If you do that, you can't include a general with the armoured ones.
No, I'm thinking I'd have the armoured hoplites going down the centre of the table, and put where the competent general, I put his guard hoplites with those. Okay.
Yeah. So not in the same command, but just deployed together.
Yeah, just butted up against each other.
Money, you take your choice. I mean, I always think I like to concentrate my hitting power. I put the chariots together. It's just the way I play it. When I play the Carthaginians, and I think I did a list for the Cyrenians earlier, which is quite similar, and I think I would concentrate the chariots. But it is what it is. What I like in the list, I mean, as you say, this is a period when the Assyrians had control of northern, the Mediterranean coast of Egypt. So it's very, very late period. I think the Scythian medium cavalry are really interesting. And I think, you could go a bit more on the shooting. The Scythians are going to be really mobile in this period and much more.
No, I think I was looking at whether there's a way of squeezing an extra one or two in, but I think given these sort of self-imposed constraints of a dozen hoplites, just, in the real world, yes, you'd probably drop a couple of the men fat and stick in a couple more Scythians, and that would become a real pokey command with a lot of mobility and a lot of width. But with these self-imposed handcuffs, there's just not enough toys to go around. But they are a really interesting troop type, particularly combined with the heavy chariots. And I think another thing, we play quite a lot of 3-game, 1-day competitions, which means you can actually, with these sort of sub 2-hour games, you can actually experiment with some of these things. And you're right, Dave. You could be cheering the elites and the armors, or you could be booing the other ones, but it doesn't kind of matter so much if it's only a day, which is much more interesting.
I think what's interesting is we're coming up with some incredible variations within this constraint of 12 hoplites. I think it's really, really, I think it's a competition that's going to have to be held and done.
No, I think you're absolutely right.
This means war.
So look, that's 6 hoplite lists, but I think one of the things we've all noticed in going through those is there's kind of a lack of the guys in red, isn't there? The Spartiates, the Spartans, which are the apex hoplite. They're the one that everybody looks at, and I think we've all attempted to probably be a bit clever, even I guess with our vanilla "here's a load of hoplites" lists, by ducking the Spartans. I'm trying to remember. Did you have a Spartan ally, Dave? Maybe, but not kind of with it. With your perhaps, was it? But I think
early Macedonians had a Spartan ally.
But actually having a Spartan-led list, and how do you use a Spartan-led list? So ultimately, it's just all about Spartans, really. But Richard, you put together this Spartan list that is Spartan, proper Spartan. It's got the elite guys, it's got the armor guys. So can you just talk us through? It's still 26, which surprises me. But just run us through how you managed to squeeze 26 into a proper heavy metal Spartan army.
So I modelled this on the sort of Thermopylae Plataea era Spartan. So there's 2 Spartan commands and an allied Athenian command. Again, saved some points by having an included general and an allied general, and not having too many of the Spartans is sadly the only way I could see to do it. So I've actually only gone for 2 in the central command. So I've got 5 armored compared to the 4 that you had in the Asiatic Egyptians, and 2 of them are elite, and one of those is an included general. So those would probably go in the middle, and they are there to really try and crack heads and break through. The other 2 commands are there to extend the width and protect the flanks. So on one side, you've got the Spartans. They've got 3 decent hoplites, but nothing that special. A little bit of cavalry, a little bit of light horse, Thracians, and 2 javelinmen. So you've got 4 to look after the rough going, and some light infantry. So quite a big command there. And that's a very decent rough terrain force. Other than obviously against those comedic Macedonians or whatever they were called. But yeah, that's putting 4 medium foot, 2 of them Thracians, into any bit of rough. So you're actually almost designing to play for rough terrain in some ways on this one. Yeah, I mean, certainly I think a number of the armies we looked at would be likely to go for 1 bit of rough. And this means that you can at least contest it. And with the spearmen on the inside, it just so you've got
You
you could
extended.
argue you've got 8 or 9 decent width troops there to add to the 5 previously.
Yeah.
And then on the other wing, we've got 5 more hoplites, one of which is armoured and elite, and the other 4 are the sort of plain vanilla type. Again, one could include the general with that elite one. The idea of having one as elite was to stick that on the end and butt that up to the Spartans just to increase the length of that
Really grunty bit. Yeah.
that edge.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it is there really just to delay opponents. So again, 1 javelinman, so they can just pop around. They can either they can stand in the line for a brief period of time. They can threaten flanks. Some light infantry just to screen those unarmored hoplites, and a light horse to, again, just, if the opponent's got no light horse, you can just be making him think by threatening an end run on his camp. As you say, it's 26 units, which is a fair size, and it's only got 1 mediocre troop type. So if it runs up against the Sciatic Egyptians, it doesn't have the chariots, and so you would just hope that at least some of the chariots are coming up against armoured spearmen, or having to spend time redeploying to get away from the armoured spearmen. And if it comes up against the others, again, you're hoping that mixture of armour and elite is going to allow the centre to break through and the wings to hold out long enough, because that they're big enough, they can hold out long enough.
Were you with this? Were you tempted just to? Because I'm looking at that middle command where you've got 2 proper Spartans and some 3 heavy armoured spearmen, non-elite. To boost those guys up to elite is 6 points, which that's the javelin man, or it's a couple of Siloi and you do another one. If you're going Spartans, is there not an argument to say, look, drop a javelin man, drop something else, and just try and get 5 or 6 of them elite? And
there's certainly that argument. I guess with hindsight, I was coloured knowing how big some of these armies could be. Being worried about getting outflanked, because at the end of the day, being elite makes a difference, but you've already paid for some of that difference in terms of armour. I mean, in spear on spear, it's a question of who doesn't take that first hit. The elite helps you maybe get an extra hit, but it's more about stopping you taking a wound. So in the 3rd round of combat, you're beginning to really build up an advantage in factors.
I suppose if your flanks are caved in, that 3rd round of combat is starting to look a bit late in the day sometimes. But I don't know. I might have been tempted to just go for 5 Spartans and lose a javelin man or a Thracitai or something, wherever they are, somewhere along the line. But Dave, what do you think? Is that?
If you want to do that, I think I'd lose one of the light horse and get 3 more elites that way. For definite, I would do that. I think, as I said earlier in the podcast, I think the javelin men are very useful, very important to. If you've got a lot of phalanx, a line of heavy spearmen, and one of them is starting to die, and you're going to have a situation, one of the opponent's spear is going to progress through the line so you can turn on the flanks. Then a javelinman coming up, because a javelinman can pin the enemy to the front, where a light horse can't, yet can still evade. You're therefore preventing a breakthrough of the line turning onto the flanks. And I think that's where those peltas so you can have a peltas floating around the back if it's going badly for your phalanx, or it can be moving forward to exploit the advantages, turning on the flanks if it's going badly. And that's very historical. The thing I like this list, what I really like this list, is it's going to look really good. I think it's now making me think to actually go out and get the figures and specifically paint a Spartan army and have it with the elite Spartiates, full Spartans, and the Perioiki, the less, elite of the sort of standard Spartans. And you could really differentiate in the shields and things like that. And, it all looked fantastic in, the right figures. Great, Yeah,
well, maybe we should have a chat about the figures.
This means war.
So, Dave, you brought up the subject of figures. I've certainly got quite a few hoplites, and although some of them are starting to look a bit long in the tooth, and I've got some of the newer ones. Have you actually got hoplites, or is this something that, well, you were saying you're tempted by? Would that be a replacement, or would that be an actual first?
No, I've got plenty of hoplites. I think I had hoplites from the days of Field of Glory and Fog. I think I had some because they were just the filler in a Alexandria Macedonian army, and they just sort of increased as they went along. But then recently I've rebased them. They're all Xyston.
Okay.
I like the Xyston hoplites because I think they're early Xyston figures. They haven't sort of got the scale creep giganticism. So
they really went crazy fairly soon after those hoplites, didn't they? The Romans were the
Romans were the real problem. But their hoplites are really nice figures. They mix with everything else quite fine, and I've rebased them all onto 40 by 30 bases.
Yeah.
I think I've got some bags of them sitting in drawers, and I like the flute players and things like that they go with them.
I think they're separate shields and separate weapons, though, aren't they?
Well. Yeah, I love the drilling. I mean, I don't like the actual drilling the hands at part of it, but I think the brass spears make an army look so much better in the long run over time. And I'll tell you, one of the tricks I've learned to do nowadays is drill through the hand and then drill through the base of the figure, almost putting it through the foot of the guy. And then when you put the spear into the base, they just won't flick off at all.
They're just gone. They're anchored in.
Yeah.
Okay. Richard, have you got 15mm hoplites? Is that one that you own of, or have we tempted you into this?
Yeah, no, I do. They're a right old mix. I've been building the hoplites over the years, and so they're a mixture of I think old Donington and Essex mainly, but I've also got some minifigs, Greek cavalry, and
wow. Are they kind of just like one seamless face of that?
Yeah.
Smooth. No ridge lines at all.
No, I've actually got 24 of those. So, but they were from I think WLG 7th days. Wow,
yeah, that would have been quite a thing. Yeah. So, which ones do you rate the most? If you were just picking one these days, what would you go with?
Well, I think. I think the new museum castings look very nice, but I quite like the Spartans in the old Donington range. They really have that very typical Spartan type helmet. Yeah. Whereas I think the museum ones that have more of the Corinthian style helmets, so they look very good for. The general states, but I hadn't seen so many that perhaps look like what I was expecting from a classic Spartan.
Because I think the new museum ones, they've got a range that are wearing kind of poser pouch underpants and cloaks and I think leather gimp masks from this film 3000 or whatever it is, 300 as well. Yeah. You get some of their special Spartans, but I suppose that's an acquired taste for it, isn't it? You either love that or you don't.
The nudists, aren't they?
No, I don't think they're quite nudists. They've got some nude ones as well. So I think with those new museum hoplites, there's a couple of unusual things about them. Their shields are extra big, and they've all been cast very flat. So I think the classic for everything is always to start with Essex and talk about how it differs from Essex. So Essex's hoplites, which I've got quite a lot of, they do need the spears replacing because the spears are a bit metal spaghetti. But their shields are really, really convex, which in these days of little big man shield transfers is just a massive problem because the transfers just don't stick on, even with all those little micro sol and micro set and stuff like that. The shields are just too convex. But the museum guys, I think David Museum has made the shields bigger because everybody likes looking at cool shield transfers, and with a flatter surface, so they take the transfers even better. But I think he sells the transfers himself, so you can't buy them from LBMS. But it's kind of an interesting, make them non-real, if you like, to make them more geared up towards what Wargame is actually like. The other range that I've got quite a few of, I've got some Zyston and a load of Essex as well, and some of those new museums, which, to be fair, they're not quite as good as those 3D renders, but they're still nice figures, and they're in a nice pewter with cast-on spears. But I've got some of the chariot miniatures range from Magister Militum that again are one-piece castings with cast-on spears, and they've got a few little, not too many of them, but they're really nicely scaled with Essex and the original Zyston. And they're again in that sort of pewtery type metal, so you don't get them breaking and going kind of too weird and too wobbly. And they certainly, when I got them, they had some really nice cast-on details. But I just have got so many. It kind of feels like if I want to upgrade them from my painting standard of mumble 20 plus years away, it would be a lot of dipping and stripping and restarting to get them all up to match. So I'm in two minds whether to go through all that rigmarole or whether just to buy some more. It's a real tricky one. And then I suppose the other option, if you really want to go idiosyncratic, is to go with the tin soldier ones. There's a few people. I think Ian Mackay has got a tin soldier army of those kind of cute hobbity guys that are very, very distinctive and very unusual. Totally impossible to mix with anything else, of course. Apart from perhaps their fat trumpeter, who is probably one of the great figures. It looks a little bit like that bloke off Little Britain playing a trumpet. It's really superb little figure. But and that can squeeze into any battle line.
Yeah.
I've not even seen. Has anybody seen the Forged in Battle ones? I guess they must do some, because we normally talk.
No, I haven't.
No, I've not come across them either, really.
I think a lot depends on how much store you put onto the helmet design. Yeah. Whether you prefer the open helmets or the closed helmets. Some manufacturers do a big range, some don't. I mean, there is some evidence that the Spartans had quite a distinctive helmet, the Pylos type, whereas others use a mix of Corinthian and Attic, and then you could have a Theban type helmet, which is what you saw a lot of the cavalry wearing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of just a mix and match. But
you can make them very distinctive by having, that's what the Zyston range, which I particularly like in them. They've got armoured hoplites, unarmoured hoplites, linen armour hoplites, and they've got the Spartan helmet. So you can really differentiate the Spartans from the more Greek mercenary hoplites and things like that. And more range. I look at the museum. I think the museum shields are too big. I'm sorry, but I get
they absolutely are. They absolutely are.
Transfer on is really important.
Yeah,
and I've struggled that with the Zyston ones, but But then that's what you do, isn't it?
No, that's an interesting philosophical discussion. Objectively, or based on trying to copy proper figures, those shields are too big. Yeah. But the upside is you get some quite big shield transfers that you can see at a long distance. So it's a deliberate mistake to overemphasize the things that wargamers actually look at on table. And I suppose it's the choice, isn't it? It does make it difficult to mix and match them in a line with other people.
Yes.
You end up with a line of theirs and then a separate unit of someone else's, or a separate few units of someone else's.
I like the museum, the various crests quite look funky, and I'd say it's an animated range, isn't it?
Well, again, it's one of the slightly odd things. I think there's about 4 or 5 poses, but because then they do exactly the same poses with and without armor, with and without clothing, and with different helmets. So you've only got kind of 4 or 5 different mannequins, if that's the word, wireframes, but with different heads and different clothing choices. So it does look animated, but it's less animated than you think. But I think that kneeling guy in the range is a real that's what gives them animation when they're in a group, whereas everybody else is just standing. Although I think it would also be nice if they had some of those curtains that hang off the bottom of if they sold that as a separate piece or something.
Spara, slightly different range, but the Spara fighting over the top of their wicker shields, their visors look really nice. I like those a lot.
Well, maybe that's for the next podcast, and we should do the Achaemenid Persian army and do, because we did the Indians, we've done the spearmen. Maybe we do a full sweep of museums range just before their annual sale in January. See if we can sneak out the podcast over Christmas and help people decide if they want to do any discounted shopping. Sounds like a plan?
Sounds like a plan.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, folks. Thank you for contributing to that. And we're coming up with 7 lists, and we've all managed to excite ourselves at the idea of playing a competition with loads of hoplites, which I'm not sure any of us thought would be the case when we started off on this one. I think we'll carry on this vein and try and pick some of these more unusual and obscure armies. We've had a couple of suggestions come in on Facebook. So over the next few weeks, we'll throw out a few more of these sorts of lists.
Like my continuity there.
It's genius, mate. I was you just feeding it to me, and I was just it was like we're in the studio with a producer on the gallery, wasn't it? With stuff in their ear. It was like I was Richard and you were Judy in some sort of strange way.